The Atlantic stretches endlessly before you dark, immense and utterly unforgiving. Imagine setting sail in tiny wooden ships with weeks of open ocean ahead, no land in sight, and survival hanging by the thinnest thread. This is the story of Columbus and his crew in 1492, a journey of danger, endurance, and discovery that changed the world forever. Before we dive into the adventure, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories of history's most perilous voyages and mysteries. The ocean waits beyond the harbour like a black wall at the edge of the known world. In the humid darkness before dawn, ropes creak against wooden masts, gulls circle above the anchored ships, and the smell of tar, salt, fish, sweat, and wet timber drifts through the port of Palos in southern Spain. Men move through torchlight carrying barrels of water, sacks of biscuit, coils of rope, cages of chickens, tools for repairs, and small personal possessions wrapped in cloth. Some of them are hardened sailors, others are prisoners released in exchange for service, a few are teenagers who have never travelled beyond the Iberian coast. Nearly all understand the same thing. Once these ships vanish into the Atlantic, survival becomes uncertain in a way few Europeans have ever experienced. Christopher Columbus stands at the centre of the activity, though even now he remains an uneasy figure, not fully trusted, not fully accepted. A foreign navigator from Genoa who spent years moving between courts, merchants, monasteries, and royal advisors trying to convince powerful people that Asia could be reached by sailing west. Scholars already know the earth is round. That is not the controversy. The danger lies in distance. Most educated Europeans believe the ocean between Europe and Asia is impossibly vast. Ships cannot carry enough food or fresh water. Winds may fail. Storms may destroy entire fleets. Sailors may simply disappear into emptiness. But Columbus insists the distance is shorter than commonly believed. He combines fragments of ancient geography, misunderstood calculations, religious conviction, traveller accounts, and personal certainty into a vision that refuses to die. Modern historians know his estimates are wildly wrong. He dramatically underestimates the size of the Earth and the breadth of the Atlantic. Without realizing it, he survives partly because two enormous continents stand between Europe and Asia. Had the Americas not existed, the expedition likely would have died at sea long before reaching East Asia. Yet in August of 1492, nobody aboard understands this. Spain itself has only just emerged from centuries of war. Earlier that same year, the last Muslim kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula falls at Granada. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand celebrate the completion of the Reconquista, the long Christian campaign to reclaim Iberia from Islamic rule. Church bells ring across the kingdom. Religious processions flood city streets. But victory comes with brutality. Jewish communities face expulsion. Religious conformity hardens. Thousands flee or lose property. Suspicion spreads through society. The monarchy wants wealth, trade, prestige, and proof that divine favour rests upon the Spanish crown. Into this atmosphere arrives Columbus with his impossible proposal. The agreement he secures is extraordinary. If successful, he'll become admiral of the ocean sea and governor over lands he discovers. He will receive titles, wealth, and a share of profits. It is a gamble by a monarchy eager for advantage against Portugal, which already dominates many Atlantic and African trade routes. The Spanish crown risks relatively little. 3 modest ships, limited supplies, a crew assembled partly through pressure and legal obligation. If the expedition vanishes, Spain loses far less than it might gain. The ships themselves are smaller than many modern people imagine. The Santa Maria, Columbus's flagship, is broad and relatively slow, more cargo vessel than warship. The Nina and Pinta are lighter caravels designed for Atlantic sailing. None are remotely comfortable. The decks are cramped. Privacy barely exists. Supplies rot quickly in damp conditions. Rats travel with the crew. Fresh water turns foul inside wooden barrels. Salted meat spoils. Biscuits become infested with insects. Every voyage of this era balances constantly on the edge of hunger, dehydration, disease, and mechanical failure. Before departure, sailors visit churches and confess sins. Some settle debts. Others disappear briefly into taverns and crowded streets seeking distraction before facing the ocean. There are wives who may never see husband again, parents watching sons board ships with forced composure, and merchants quietly calculating whether this expedition will return rich or vanish without trace into Atlantic storms. Survival at sea during the 15th century depends on skill, luck, weather, discipline, and forces no sailor can control. What survives in the historical record suggests morale is uncertain even before departure. Some crewmen reportedly join unwillingly. The Pinzon brothers, experienced mariners from Palos, become essential in convincing others to sail. Without them, the voyage may never have launched at all. Martin Alonso Pinzon especially brings credibility, local influence, and practical seamanship that Columbus alone cannot provide. Shortly before sunrise on August 3, 1492, the expedition finally departs. The harbour slowly recedes behind them. Church towers fade into distance. The coastline of Spain becomes a thin, pale line beneath the morning light. Ahead lies the Atlantic, vast beyond comprehension for men whose maps still contain rumours, blank spaces, and imagined islands. The crew enters waters already known to European sailors at first, following routes down toward the Canary Islands. But even this early stage reveals how fragile the expedition truly is. The Pinta develops rudder problems almost immediately. Some later accounts suggest sabotage by owners reluctant to risk the ship. Scholars still debate whether the damage is accidental, deliberate, or exaggerated afterward to explain delays. Whatever the cause, repairs become necessary. Time passes. Supplies are consumed. Anxiety grows before the true crossing even begins. At the Canary Islands, the expedition pauses longer than intended. Repairs continue while volcanic peaks loom above the harbour. Sailors hear stories of Atlantic currents, monsters, strange islands, and regions where ships become trapped by windless seas. Medieval Europe inherits centuries of legends about the ocean beyond familiar waters. Sea serpents, endless fog, boiling waters near the equator, magnetic anomalies, the complete collapse of navigation. Even experienced mariners carry fragments of these fears. And beyond fear lies something simpler and more dangerous uncertainty. No European fleet has attempted exactly this crossing before. Portuguese sailors have pushed south along Africa. Norse voyagers reached parts of North America centuries earlier, though knowledge of those settlements faded from most of Europe. Columbus is venturing into an Atlantic route unsupported by reliable precedent. The crew knows it. Every man aboard understands that familiar coastlines will eventually disappear entirely. Before leaving the Canaries, final adjustments are made, water casks are inspected, rigging tightened, food redistributed, livestock secured, small leaks patched, prayers repeated, Some sailors likely notice how tiny the ships appear against the open ocean beyond the harbour mouth. Then the winds shift. The expedition turns westward into the Atlantic on September 6th. Europe begins to vanish behind them for the last time. For days the sea seems manageable. Favourable trade winds push the ship steadily onward beneath warm skies. Flying fish break across the waves. Dolphins appear beside the hulls. The rhythm of shipboard life slowly settles into routine. Men pump water, repair sails, scrub decks, prepare food, adjust rigging, and scan horizons that remain empty in every direction. But as the coastline disappears completely, a deeper realization begins spreading silently through the fleet. There is no visible path home anymore. The Atlantic now surrounds them on all sides like a living wilderness. No rescue can come quickly. No harbour lies nearby. Every surviving plank, sail, rope, and barrel suddenly matters. A single storm could erase the expedition from history without leaving survivors to explain what happened. And somewhere beyond that endless horizon, unknown to everyone aboard, an entirely different world waits in silence. The farther west the ships travel, the more the Atlantic begins to feel less like a road and more like a separate world with its own rules. The familiar rhythms of coastal sailing disappear within days. There are no fishing villages along the horizon, no passing merchant vessels, no distant church towers, no visible signs of Europe at all, only water, wind, clouds, and the constant motion of timber floating across immense depth. The three ships move in loose formation beneath late summer skies, their patched sails pulling steadily through the trade winds. At first, the weather seems almost merciful. The Atlantic offers calm seas and favourable currents, allowing the fleet to cover distance faster than expected. Columbus sees confirmation of his ambitions in every mile gained, but for many aboard, the ease of the journey creates its own form of dread. The same winds carrying them westward may also prevent them from returning east. Life aboard the ships quickly becomes exhausting in ways impossible to escape. The Santa Maria, though the largest vessel, offers little comfort. Its deck is crowded with supplies, ropes, anchors, livestock, and men trying to sleep in cramped spaces protected poorly from rain and spray. The Nina and Pinta are even smaller, narrow ships built for maneuverability rather than human endurance. There are no proper sleeping quarters for ordinary sailors. Most sleep directly on deck or beneath rough coverings whenever weather allows. During storms or heavy seas, rest becomes nearly impossible. Fresh water already begins deteriorating inside the barrels. Wooden casks leak slightly, absorb heat, and develop foul tastes after weeks at sea. Wine often becomes safer to drink than water. Salted pork hardens into nearly inedible slabs. Ship biscuit, baked hard to survive long voyages, attracts insects almost immediately. Sailors sometimes soften the biscuit in seawater or wine before eating it. Protein comes from dried legumes, preserved fish, cheese, and whatever livestock survives long enough to slaughter. Rats move freely through the ships at night. The smell below deck becomes suffocating. Wet wood, mould, animal waste, sweat, spoiled food, stagnant water, tar, and human bodies trapped together in confined spaces create an atmosphere many modern people would find unbearable within hours. Yet sailors of the 15th century endure such conditions routinely because maritime survival allows few alternatives. Hygiene remains minimal, clothes stay damp for days, skin infections spread easily, minor injuries become dangerous if untreated. What surprises some historians is not how often these voyages fail, but how often anyone survives them at all. The work never stops. Sailors climb rigging in darkness and high winds to adjust sails. Others pump bilge water collecting inside the hull. Carpenters inspect beams for signs of cracking. Navigators monitor direction through dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed, currents, time, and compass headings. There are no accurate clocks for determining longitude. Precision navigation across open ocean barely exists by modern standards. Much depends on judgment, experience, and educated guesswork. Columbus himself carefully manages information. According to surviving accounts, he keeps 2 separate records of distance travelled. One reflects the actual estimated mileage. The other intentionally shortens the numbers shared with the crew. He understands morale may collapse if sailors fully grasp how far they are moving away from Europe. Whether every detail of this practice is historically accurate remains debated, but the broader reality is clear enough. Columbus governs not only ships, but fear. And fear spreads easily at sea. The Atlantic sky changes constantly. Some mornings begin with smooth water shining like polished metal beneath pale sunlight. By afternoon, winds strengthen abruptly and dark clouds gather across the horizon. Rain sweeps over the ships in cold, violent bursts. Sailors scramble barefoot across slippery decks, securing ropes while masts groan overhead. Lightning sometimes flashes far away beyond walls of cloud, illuminating enormous stretches of ocean that seem almost infinite. At night, the psychological strain deepens. The darkness over the Atlantic in 1492 is nearly absolute, without cities, engines, or electric light. The stars dominate the sky with overwhelming intensity. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like white smoke. Phosphorescent organisms glow beneath the ships, trailing cold blue light through black water. To exhausted sailors already primed by superstition and isolation, the ocean can feel haunted. Many aboard interpret the voyage through religion as much as navigation. Storms may signal divine anger. Favourable winds may reflect heavenly approval. Strange events become loaded with meaning. Medieval Europe does not sharply separate natural forces from spiritual interpretation. Even practical sailors carry relics, prayers, and fears alongside navigational tools. Before the voyage grows truly dangerous, another subtle transformation occurs. Time itself begins changing. Days lose distinction aboard ship. The same horizon surrounds them every morning. The same labour repeats endlessly. Men measure existence through watches, meals, wind changes, and sail adjustments rather than dates. The monotony becomes psychologically corrosive. Some sailors stare for hours into the ocean searching desperately for signs of land. Others withdraw into silence. Arguments flare over small irritations. Tiny mistakes carry disproportionate emotional weight because there is nowhere to escape. Columbus, meanwhile, maintains outward confidence. He studies birds, cloud formations, currents, and floating vegetation for clues. He believes islands may appear soon. His certainty, however, rests partly on misunderstanding. He imagines Asia far closer than reality. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how much private doubt he truly experiences during these weeks. But outward hesitation would be disastrous. Leadership aboard such an expedition depends heavily on performance. If the commander appears uncertain, discipline can collapse quickly. The crew also notices something increasingly strange about the wind itself. The easterly trade winds push them steadily westward day after day with remarkable consistency. At first this seems fortunate, then unsettling. Sailors begin wondering how ships will ever sail back against such persistent winds. Some fear they are entering a region from which return is impossible. The Atlantic no longer behaves like familiar coastal waters. It feels directional, almost alive. Birds occasionally appear, offering bursts of hope. Small land birds should not be far from shore, or so many believe. Floating branches drift past. Clumps of vegetation appear atop the water. Each sign sparks rumours that land must lie nearby. Then days pass with nothing but open sea again. The psychological effect becomes severe because expectation rises and collapses repeatedly. One evening the sunset burns deep red across low clouds while the ocean remains unusually calm. Sailors gather quietly along the rails, staring westward. Somewhere beyond that glowing horizon, Columbus insists, lies Cipangu, the wealthy island kingdom known from travellers' tales of Asia. Gold, spices, silk, and enormous cities supposedly wait there. But most common sailors are not dreaming about spices or royal prestige anymore. They are thinking about survival. A snapped mast, a contaminated water supply, a storm, fire aboard ship, hull damage from unseen reefs, sickness spreading below deck. Any one of these dangers could destroy the expedition. Open ocean voyages in this period exist in constant negotiation with catastrophe. The Atlantic remains indifferent to ambition. And still the fleet continues west. By mid-September, the ocean around them begins changing in subtle but deeply unsettling ways. The water grows calmer. Vast patches of floating seaweed drift across the surface. Currents move strangely beneath the hulls. The ships enter a region unlike anything most of the crew has ever seen before. The Sargasso Sea. For centuries, stories about these waters will spread across Europe filled with exaggeration and fear. Some sailors aboard Columbus's expedition already suspect they are approaching a place where the ocean itself becomes a trap. Ahead of them, the Atlantic waits in eerie silence. The Sargasso Sea presents a different kind of challenge than the storms or cold winds that had tested the fleet before. Endless mats of floating seaweed stretch across the surface in tangled brown-green networks, rolling like living carpets. To sailors unfamiliar with the phenomenon, the sight is unsettling. No land is visible, yet the water seems cluttered and immovable, almost as if the ocean itself is slowing down, resisting progress. The scent of decaying plant matter mingles with salt and the ever-present tang of tar and sweat aboard the ships. Modern oceanography explains that this accumulation forms naturally in the centre of the North Atlantic gyre, but in 1492 the phenomenon feeds superstition and unease. Some men whisper of seas enchanted, of vessels ensnared forever, and of unknown perils lying just beneath the mat of vegetation. Life aboard the ships has by now become a daily ordeal where survival requires constant attention and ingenuity. Sailors stand watch for threats to hull integrity, monitor for approaching squalls, and manage the relentless exposure to sun, wind, and salt spray. A man may spend hours scrubbing mould from the deck, only to find it reappearing overnight. Their diet, monotonous and meagre, slowly erodes both morale and health. Scurvy caused by vitamin C deficiency is beginning to creep into consciousness, though its cause is unknown to European medicine of the era. Teeth loosen, gums swell and bleed, energy diminishes, and the most resistant men begin showing irritability, weakness, and occasional delirium. Even small injuries risk infection in damp, unsanitary conditions. The psychology aboard the vessels is equally perilous. Men confined together in the wooden hulls develop tempers that flare easily. Minor disagreements over food rationing, sleeping space, or rope handling can ignite arguments that threaten the fragile social cohesion necessary to keep the ships intact. Columbus must manage not only navigation, but discipline. He issues orders, assigns watches, and reminds the crew of their ultimate reward land, wealth, and recognition. Yet the constant absence of tangible progress can undermine authority. Some sailors begin to grumble openly, questioning whether the journey might stretch endlessly. Historians debate how much of this dissatisfaction is documented exaggeration, and how much reflects genuine crisis. But what survives in record suggests tension was palpable. Night brings its own trials. Darkness aboard these wooden vessels is absolute, broken only by starlight and flickering lanterns. Men are forced to navigate stairs, ropes, and uneven decks in near total obscurity, always wary of slipping into cold, deep water. The motion of the Atlantic at night is unpredictable. Even in calm waters, swells lift and drop the ships in slow, rolling undulations. Sleep is broken into short, irregular bursts, leaving men perpetually exhausted. Persistent anxiety, combined with physical strain, creates a cumulative effect. Sailors begin seeing shadows where none exist, misinterpreting natural phenomena as signs of divine judgment or supernatural threats. Superstition is pervasive. Sailors rely on prayers, talismans, and whispered blessings for protection. Tales of sea monsters, vanishing islands, and endless whirlpools circulate freely, their veracity irrelevant in an environment where fear is tangible. Birds and floating debris are interpreted as omens, their meaning magnified in the minds of men with no horizon in sight. One feathered visitor or a drifting log can become a symbol of hope or of doom. These perceptions influence morale and decision-making in subtle but critical ways. Even the most rational crew members cannot escape the psychological impact of isolation. The physical confinement interacts dangerously with human behavior. Men often sleep atop supplies, sometimes stacked upon barrels or in narrow recesses beneath deck. Rats are constant companions, nibbling at food and occasionally biting unprotected skin. Vermin carry disease, consume limited provisions, and heighten frustration. Freshwater barrels may become contaminated, forcing sailors to drink wine or brackish water to survive. Despite these challenges, order must be maintained. Shipboard hierarchy is absolute. Officers supervise sailors' tasks relentlessly. Mistakes or disobedience risk punishment, sometimes by lash or extended duties. Maintaining this balance of authority and survival is a delicate, never-ending task. During these weeks, small measures of ingenuity make life tolerable. Sailors catch fish off the side of the ships, mend sails and ropes, and create rudimentary means to manage the stench and dampness below decks. Ship's carpenters patch leaks and reinforce hulls. The Pinzon brothers, experienced navigators, provide guidance and leadership that Columbus himself values immensely. Their intervention stabilizes morale and prevents minor crises from escalating into mutiny. Scholars still debate how much these individual figures determine survival, but evidence suggests that the cohesion of the crew depends on such capable, steadying hands. Yet the challenges are not merely mundane. Storms can arrive without warning, transforming a calm ocean into a roiling menace. Waves crush against hulls, masts threaten to snap, and even minor leaks become life-threatening. Without modern weather prediction, sailors rely on observation of cloud formations, wind shifts, and watercolor to anticipate danger. Each successful navigation of these storms reinforces confidence, but does not erase fear. The Atlantic is vast, unpredictable, and indifferent to human plans. This mixture of monotony, constant labor, hunger, Disease, fear, and occasional peril defines the reality of surviving in the early weeks of the crossing. Time passes unevenly. The distinction between days blurs. Horizons remain empty. Small victories, patching a sail, catching fish, or spotting a distant bird become psychologically significant. The voyage, still in its early stages, begins to transform men physically and mentally, testing limits of endurance, obedience, and hope. Despite all hardship, the fleet presses onward. Columbus maintains a blend of authority, optimism, and careful concealment of uncertainty, managing the fine line between realism and reassurance. The men, exhausted and increasingly anxious, understand only one truth clearly. Survival depends on endurance, cooperation, and the fragile leadership guiding them through a vast, silent ocean, and in the shifting, weed-strewn waters of the Atlantic. The first deep tests of human resilience at sea are only beginning to reveal themselves. Navigating the open Atlantic in 1492 is an exercise in constant calculation and cautious guesswork. There are no accurate charts for these waters, no detailed maps beyond the edges of Europe and Africa, no clocks capable of determining longitude. Columbus and his officers rely on dead reckoning, measuring speed through water with knots and log lines, estimating distance by hours spent under sail, and calculating direction using the stars, sun, and compass. Even these tools offer only partial certainty. Magnetic variation confuses compasses. Ocean currents shift unexpectedly, and clouds sometimes obscure celestial guides for days. For the sailors below deck, these technicalities matter little. What they perceive is an endless expanse of water, day after day, with no land in sight and no guarantee their commander can lead them safely to shore. Columbus manages uncertainty with a combination of secrecy and narrative. He keeps detailed logs for himself and the crown, but often filters what is shared with the crew. Distances may be underestimated, weather conditions downplayed, threats framed as manageable. Scholars still debate how much of this deliberate information control was necessary discipline, and how much was psychological manipulation to prevent panic. The evidence is incomplete, but the effect is clear. Men are kept moving forward by a fragile balance of hope, obedience, and trust, each element constantly threatened by the reality of their environment. The ocean itself begins to exert a new kind of pressure. Winds shift erratically, currents grow stronger in unseen eddies, and familiar patterns of cloud and wave fail to repeat reliably. Occasionally, the fleet encounters sudden squalls that slam against the hulls without warning. Masts sway violently, rigging snaps. Sailors fight to secure loose boards, casks, and livestock. Water surges onto the deck, soaking men and supplies alike. Even minor mishaps can escalate rapidly, threatening lives and the fragile cohesion of the crew. The Atlantic is no longer merely a route to unknown lands. It is an adversary demanding constant attention and adaptation. Mental strain amplifies physical strain. Sailors already weakened by scurvy, malnutrition, and exhaustion begin to lose concentration. Small errors in navigation or seamanship can have catastrophic consequences, especially in these isolated waters. Sleep deprivation distorts perception. Men begin to report hallucinations, shadows that shift with the waves, faint whispers in the wind, shapes in the foam that resemble monsters or distant islands. Modern psychology explains much of this as the combination of isolation, monotony, and stress. But for the men of 1492, these visions carry the weight of superstition and foreboding. Fear, once subtle, becomes a constant companion. Columbus himself observes the ocean with relentless curiosity. He watches birds and floating debris for signs of land, noting their direction, frequency, and behavior. He studies currents, wind shifts, and cloud formations for patterns that might guide the fleet toward islands and ultimately toward Asia. These observations are grounded in centuries of maritime knowledge and practical experience, yet they are incomplete. The Atlantic is unpredictable. Even the most careful reading of natural signs can mislead. What survives in the record suggests Columbus relies as much on intuition as on technique, blending observation with hopeful inference to keep the expedition moving forward. Even small signs of land or what could be interpreted as land carry immense significance. A cluster of seabirds resting on a floating log might indicate proximity to an island. A sudden rise in water temperature or clarity may hint at currents that converge near shallow areas. Fragments of driftwood or unfamiliar vegetation are meticulously noted. Each anomaly, each irregularity in the environment, becomes a potential lifeline or warning. Sailors stare at the horizon for hours, scanning for anything that could break the monotony and provide a tangible goal, but most often see only endless ocean. The psychological weight of such repeated absence cannot be overstated. Men know they are moving further from home, yet nothing confirms that land or safety awaits ahead. Amid this uncertainty, leadership becomes crucial. Columbus cannot simply command. He must manage perception, morale, and the fragile threads of obedience. He meets with officers regularly, conferring over observations, calculating progress, and adjusting routes. He awards small privileges or recognition to maintain loyalty. He issues strict discipline when necessary, sometimes using punishment to reinforce order. Survival at sea is as much a matter of psychological endurance as of physical skill. Without cohesion, even the sturdiest ships are vulnerable. Meanwhile, tension among the crew grows. Some sailors openly question the feasibility of the voyage. Rumors circulate about lost expeditions, cursed waters, and captains who vanished without a trace. Skepticism mixes with fear, and suspicion occasionally turns toward fellow crewmen. Mutinous thoughts, though rarely acted upon, creep into conversations below deck. The discipline required to prevent chaos is delicate. Columbus's careful balance of secrecy, optimism, and authoritative control keeps the expedition intact, but only barely. Historians continue to debate how close the fleet truly came to open mutiny during these weeks of navigation. But what is clear is that the ocean tests more than seamanship. It tests leadership and trust. As the fleet progresses, the boundary between day and night blurs. Men lose track of time. Routines dominate experience, adjust sails, pump bilge, scrub decks, secure casks, observe horizon, record observations. Food is prepared and rationed, often barely enough to sustain weakened bodies. Water is measured meticulously. Tasks repeat endlessly, a hypnotic cycle of labor and vigilance. The monotony is punctuated only by storms, erratic currents, and occasional sightings of floating wildlife, each providing fleeting relief or renewed anxiety. And yet, despite all of these challenges, the fleet moves steadily westward. Each mile traveled confirms the possibility of success. Though the distance remains daunting, Columbus maintains hope, discipline, and authority, steering not only the ships but the fragile morale of men who are confronting the ocean in its vastest, most indifferent form. The open Atlantic has become both arena and adversary, demanding endurance, vigilance, and resilience. Survival depends on constant adaptation. Trust in leadership and the ability to persist in the face of fear, fatigue, and uncertainty. As the ships press farther west, the Atlantic begins to change in ways both subtle and disorienting. They enter what sailors will later call the Sargasso Sea, a vast stretch of calm, warm water dotted with drifting mats of brown seaweed, the texture of which is unlike anything Europeans have seen. Floating in tangled clusters, it slows the movement of the ships, tangling rudders, fouling anchors, and creating a constant low-grade anxiety among the crew. The water itself appears strangely buoyant, shimmering beneath the sun in patches of green and gold, reflecting light in ways that distort the horizon. To the men, it feels as if the ocean is neither entirely liquid nor entirely solid, a liminal space where natural law is suspended. Here, the psychological dimension of survival becomes impossible to ignore. The endless calm contrasts sharply with earlier storms, giving the impression that time itself is arrested. Days blend together in a monotonous sequence of heat, humidity, labour, and watchfulness. Sailors scan the horizon constantly for signs of land, yet none appear. Currents shift unpredictably, winds fail to steady, and even experienced mariners begin to doubt their ability to measure distance accurately. Columbus himself observes with careful attention, noting the direction of floating debris and the behaviour of seabirds, but even his expertise provides only a partial understanding. No single explanation fully accounts for the peculiar calm and accumulation of vegetation that surrounds them. Food and water become an ever-present concern. Salted meat hardens, biscuity rations crumble into powder, and stored water develops a faintly bitter taste. Men improvise where they can, catching fish or softening biscuits in wine. Scurvy begins to claim subtle victims, gums bleed, teeth loosen, energy wanes, and minor injuries heal slowly. Sleep, broken by the constant creak of timber and the unpredictable motion of the calm sea, offers little relief. Mental strain grows alongside physical weakness. Sailors report seeing mirages on the water, floating landforms that vanish when approached, though these are likely optical illusions caused by heat, moisture, and fatigue. Yet for men whose world has narrowed to 3 wooden ships and an endless horizon, such visions carry profound weight. Fear is amplified by isolation. The nearest known European ports lie thousands of miles east. Even the smallest accident leak, fire, illness could cascade into disaster. Superstitions once peripheral become central to daily life. The Sargasso Sea acquires a reputation as a trap, a place from which no sailor ever returns. Every drifting log or feather becomes a potential omen, every unexplained bird sighting a harbinger of hope or doom. Columbus's careful concealment of navigational uncertainty is vital. Without it, the crew's morale might collapse entirely. Historians still debate how effective these psychological strategies were, but surviving men would later credit leadership as decisive in keeping the fleet together. The ocean also tests the crew physically in unexpected ways. Sun exposure is relentless. Blistering skin and dehydration are constant risks. Saltwater stings, cuts, and abrasions. Confined spaces below deck amplify humidity and heat, making sleep and movement uncomfortable. Rats, ever present and bold, consume precious food and gnaw at provisions. Crewmen grow thin and pale, their bodies responding to a combination of malnutrition, fatigue, and stress. Even minor mishaps are slipped rope. A falling barrel, a misstep on a slick deck threaten serious injury. At the same time, the environment offers subtle signs that survival is still possible. Birds occasionally appear, suggesting land lies within a certain distance. Floating vegetation hints at shallow waters and nearby islands. Dolphins sometimes swim alongside the ships, a familiar companion in a strange, featureless world. Columbus records every detail, interpreting natural phenomena for clues, yet he cannot know how many days or weeks remain before landfall, or what the unknown islands beyond the horizon will demand from the crew. Human psychology in this context becomes a complex, delicate instrument. Some sailors respond with awe, curiosity, and renewed commitment. Others succumb to despair, questioning the voyage's feasibility, whispering of mutiny, or withdrawing into lethargy. Commanders balance discipline with encouragement, ration with generosity, and caution with calculated risk. The thin line between obedience and rebellion is constantly tested, and small errors either in judgment or communication could ripple through the fleet with catastrophic consequences. Despite the oppressive calm and accumulating anxiety, the expedition continues. Each day spent navigating these strange waters reinforces endurance, stamina, and the necessity of trust in leadership. Men labour constantly, maintaining sails, pumping bilge, scrubbing decks, observing horizons, and recording notes. Every measure of survival food, water, hygiene, morale demands attention. No moment is trivial, for failure in even one area can threaten all. Above the deck, the Atlantic stretches as far as the eye can see. Below, crews endure cramped, vermin-filled quarters, the smell of salt, rot, and sweat, the constant threat of disease, and the creeping effects of scurvy. The ocean is a living test, measuring human resilience, skill, and resolve in ways that modern maps and calculations cannot fully capture. And while Columbus continues to steer, observe, and plan, the men experience the vastness not as numbers or nautical miles, but as an overwhelming, suffocating reality, an unending alien world where survival depends on endurance, discipline, and the slimmest margins of luck. By the middle of the crossing, anxiety among the crew begins to crystallize into something more tangible, the threat of mutiny. Weeks of confinement in the narrow, rolling ships, coupled with the monotony of endless horizon and the ever-present discomfort of hunger, disease, and fatigue, gradually erode patience. Men whisper in corners, sharing doubts and fears they cannot voice in front of officers. Some question Columbus's leadership outright, accusing him of exaggerating distance or hiding vital information. Others consider the possibility that no land exists westward at all, that the fleet has been sent into an ocean that will swallow them without a trace. Mutiny, a perennial danger on long voyages, begins to loom as a real, imminent threat. The psychological strain is compounded by the tangible signs of fatigue and deprivation. Crewmen's faces grow pale, gums bleed, hands crack, and energy wanes. A minor injury or illness, which in any land-based setting might be easily managed, becomes potentially fatal. Sleep remains intermittent. Seasickness, heat, and constant labour prevent restorative rest. Food and water supplies are carefully rationed, yet the measures are often insufficient. Ship's biscuits become powdery. Salted meat and dried legumes provide only minimal nutrition. Scurvy, though poorly understood, begins claiming subtle victims, weakening muscles and dulling minds. The boundary between physical exhaustion and psychological collapse blurs, intensifying tension. Columbus's response combines authority, strategy, and careful management of perception. Officers are relied upon to enforce order, monitor morale, and prevent complaints from spreading. Columbus himself maintains a facade of calm, deliberately concealing doubts and emphasizing minor successes. He celebrates small observations, floating birds, drifting logs, favorable currents to signal progress. Each piece of evidence of approaching land becomes a tool to sustain hope. This management of uncertainty is as critical as any skill with sails or navigation, for the crew's cohesion depends on belief in leadership as much as on any tangible measures of survival. Mutinous thoughts, however, do not remain abstract for long. Arguments flare, small acts of defiance appear, and whispers circulate about abandoning the expedition or turning back. Some sailors openly suggest that Columbus is risking their lives unnecessarily, pressing for a return to Europe before resources are exhausted. Even the Pinzon brothers, whose experience and local influence were essential to securing the voyage, must intervene to restore order. Historical accounts vary, and scholars debate the precise degree of dissent, but what survives suggests that discipline is perpetually fragile. A single misstep could unravel months of careful preparation and endurance. Natural conditions exacerbate these pressures. The calm sea, while seemingly benign, becomes oppressive. Days without wind stretch onward, and water surfaces shimmer under relentless sun. Floating vegetation, while occasionally promising, can tangle rudders and foul anchors, creating minor crises that are magnified by exhaustion. The monotony of motion and labour heightens sensitivity to perceived slights or injustices among men already stretched to their limits. Every creak of timber, every shifting of sails, every wave against the hull becomes imbued with symbolic weight. In this environment, rumour, fear, and fatigue combine into a potent mix threatening cohesion. Columbus, aware of the fragile balance, employs both psychological and practical strategies. Crewmen are rotated through watches, given small privileges, and reminded of reward and prestige awaiting success. He stresses unity and the shared goal of discovery, weaving narrative into survival. Yet even with these efforts, minor disruptions, a broken mast, a spoiled barrel of water, an argument over rations can inflame underlying tensions. Command becomes a delicate exercise in predicting human behaviour as much as controlling ships or interpreting currents. What is remarkable is that, despite these conditions, outright mutiny never materializes in a fully organized form. Leadership, experience, and careful management of expectation hold the crew together, though only just. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow and fragmented. Exhausted men lie atop wet decks or beneath improvised coverings, constantly aware of shifting boards, sudden movements of the ship, and the faint, pervasive smell of rot and unwashed bodies. Dreams are haunted by waves, storms, and visions of distant shorelines that may never exist. Hallucinations sometimes occur, fueled by scurvy, dehydration, or fatigue. Some sailors report seeing phantom islands, floating cities, or distant fires on the horizon. These images are at once a balm and a terror, reflecting the fragile interplay between hope and fear that defines life aboard these tiny vessels. The threat of mutiny also highlights the social complexity of the fleet. The crew is not homogeneous. Experienced mariners mingle with novices, prisoners, and reluctant volunteers. Social hierarchy, rank, and personal reputation carry weight, influencing how grievances are voiced and resolved. Alliances form subtly, sometimes between men of similar origin, skill, or temperament, creating factions that require careful monitoring. Columbus and the Pinzons maintain authority through visible competence and decisive action, but the human element, jealousy, resentment, fear, superstition remains unpredictable. Survival is as much a negotiation of human behavior as of weather and navigation. Amid this fragile tension, the fleet presses onward. Each passing day tests not only physical endurance, but the capacity of men to remain cooperative under stress. Success depends on small acts of maintenance, observation, and obedience carried out consistently over time. The Atlantic stretches endlessly around them, indifferent to hope, fear, or ambition. Every moment is a negotiation between human vulnerability and the unforgiving expanse of the ocean. The men of 1492, bound together by circumstance, skill, and necessity, confront a truth both stark and immutable. Their survival rests as much on psychological resilience and trust in leadership as on sails, rudders, or navigation. Storms arrive with sudden ferocity, shattering any sense of rhythm the fleet had managed to establish. Dark clouds roll across the sky, transforming the horizon into a shifting wall of grey. Winds roar and slam against sails, bending masts and ripping at rigging. Waves rise like mountains, their crests crashing onto decks, sweeping barrels, crates, and sometimes men into the churning sea. Even seasoned sailors fight to maintain footing and control. Small errors in coordination can cascade into catastrophe. The Atlantic is no longer a passive expanse, but an active, unpredictable adversary, testing the very limits of human skill and endurance. In between these storms, an eerie silence and unnatural calm prevail. Days stretch endlessly with barely a ripple across the water, only the faint drift of seaweed breaking the monotony. Birds appear intermittently, signalling the proximity of land, or so sailors hope. Floating branches and distant logs give fleeting optimism, yet days pass without tangible confirmation. Each anomaly is scrutinized, sometimes excessively, as men search desperately for signs that the vast ocean has an end. The alternating extremes, violent storms, and uncanny stillness create a psychological pendulum, swinging crew morale between fear, despair, and cautious hope. Superstitions flourish in these conditions. Sailors interpret sudden shifts in wind or the sight of unfamiliar birds as divine messages. Whispers circulate about sea monsters, vanishing islands, or cursed waters. Even Columbus, while focused on observation and navigation, cannot entirely dispel the power of these beliefs. In a world where survival depends on cooperation and morale, managing perception is as crucial as repairing sails or plotting a course. Evidence from logs suggests he carefully emphasizes signs of potential landfall, giving hope while concealing uncertainties that might provoke panic. The Sargasso Sea continues to exert its strange influence. Floating vegetation becomes denser in some regions, entangling rudders and complicating navigation. Currents shift unexpectedly, sometimes slowing the fleet for days. The constant presence of detritus plants, driftwood, and occasional sea creatures reinforces the sense of isolation, as though the ships are suspended in a timeless liminal space. Historians note that sailors of the era often regarded this sea as almost mystical, a boundary where the ordinary laws of the ocean seem suspended. It is a place where survival depends equally on endurance, observation, and belief. Disease and deprivation remain constant threats. Scurvy progresses in subtle ways. Weakness, gum bleeding, slow healing, and fatigue erode men's ability to perform even basic tasks. Infections from minor cuts or insect bites can worsen rapidly in damp, crowded conditions. Food shortages compound physical and mental strain. Sailors guard provisions jealously. sometimes sparking quarrels over rations. Water, though abundant in quantity, is often brackish or fouled, forcing men to make difficult choices between thirst and safety. Each day is a test of resilience, requiring ingenuity, patience, and relentless labour. Sleep remains precarious. Men rest atop supplies, in narrow, poorly ventilated spaces, or on wet decks, always aware that the ship may pitch violently at any moment. Dreams blend with waking anxieties, phantom islands, monstrous waves, and imagined fires haunt subconscious thought. Hallucinations, likely induced by exhaustion and malnutrition, appear intermittently, reinforcing fear. Yet even these distorted visions can motivate action, driving sailors to remain alert and attentive, maintaining the delicate balance between survival and collapse. Amid these challenges, signs of life provide intermittent relief. Birds glide above, dolphins trail alongside, and floating vegetation occasionally offers clues to approaching land. Columbus studies these indicators meticulously, attempting to discern patterns in currents and wind, recording every detail. Each observation feeds a delicate calculus of probability, guiding decisions that may mean life or death. His methods blend empirical observation with intuition, partially informed by experience and partially by hope. The combination of relentless labour, psychological strain, and environmental uncertainty pushes human endurance to its limits. Sailors exist in a suspended state, their daily reality defined by the tension between absolute dependence on their ships and the unpredictable forces of nature around them. Success hinges on continuous adaptation, careful attention, and unwavering cooperation. Any lapse disobedience, fatigue, or misjudgment can have immediate and catastrophic consequences. Survival depends on a complex interplay of physical skill, leadership, observation, and psychological resilience, all tested within the endless, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic. Even with storms, silences, and strange signs, the fleet moves steadily forward. The Atlantic, immense and unknowable, measures human capability, endurance, and trust in leadership. The crew, weary but persistent, presses onward into uncertainty, aware that each passing day draws them further from familiar shores and deeper into a world whose contours remain undefined and perilous. Every observation, every careful action, every retained ounce of hope is essential in a journey where the line between life and disaster is thinner than a rope stretched across the deck. Weeks into the voyage, the full weight of human endurance begins to manifest. Bodies weakened by fatigue, malnutrition, and scurvy struggle to perform basic tasks. Hands blister from constant rope work, backs ache from hours bent over sails and pumps, and feet are raw from endless exposure to wet, slippery decks. Some men develop sores that fester under unsanitary conditions. Muscles stiffen, joints ache, and even the simplest labour hoisting a sail, bailing water, or repairing a loose plank demands disproportionate effort. Sleep remains sporadic and shallow. Every wave, every creak of timber, every sudden gust of wind punctures attempts at rest. Survival now depends on a combination of physical stamina, vigilance, and sheer willpower, attributes tested relentlessly by both environment and confinement. The psychological toll grows in parallel. Isolation in a vast, featureless ocean stretches the mind thin. Horizons offer no landmarks, no predictability. Days merge into indistinguishable sequences of labour and observation. Sailors grow restless, anxious, and, in some cases, hostile. Minor arguments escalate. whisperings of mutiny resurface, and a pervasive fear settles over the fleet. The human mind, conditioned for terrestrial life and predictable cycles of day and night, struggles to adapt to the ocean's rhythmless vastness. Even the most experienced mariners display signs of mental fatigue, seeing patterns in drifting weeds or distant clouds that are often illusions born of exhaustion and desperation. Food scarcity compounds the strain. Rations, measured meticulously, provide only minimal sustenance. Salted meat hardens, dried legumes become tasteless, and ship biscuits crumble into dust. Water, stored in wooden casks, grows stale and bitter. Some crewmen resort to softening biscuits in wine or chewing slowly to conserve energy. Freshwater scarcity forces difficult decisions, and even minor mistakes in rationing could spark conflict. The physical weakening caused by malnutrition intersects with psychological strain, reducing patience, increasing irritability, and magnifying fear. The threat of scurvy looms ominously. Though the causes were unknown, in 1492 symptoms begin to emerge: bleeding gums, tooth loosening, swelling of limbs, and lethargy. Injuries heal slowly, energy declines, and men grow increasingly irritable and dependent on leadership. Small injuries, infections, or even simple fatigue now carry heightened consequences. The cumulative effect of these physiological stresses is a slow, nearly imperceptible erosion of strength and resolve that makes the crew ever more fragile. Amid this, observation and vigilance remain essential. Columbus monitors currents, stars, floating vegetation, and bird behavior, interpreting each as a potential sign of land. Birds that skim the surface or settle on logs suggest islands nearby. Drifting branches indicate shallow waters. Even a sudden change in wave patterns or watercolor becomes a clue. To the crew, these observations are sometimes the only reassurance that progress is occurring. Every minor discovery is magnified, a beacon of hope against the monotonous, demanding expanse. The hierarchy aboard the ships becomes a lifeline. Officers, including the Pinzon brothers, enforce discipline, assign tasks, and mediate disputes. Their presence stabilizes social order, preventing small quarrels from escalating into chaos. Leadership relies on visibility, decisiveness, and the ability to project confidence, even when doubt exists privately. Historical evidence suggests that these human dynamics were as crucial to survival as the ships themselves. Trust in command is tested continuously, and any perceived failure could ignite panic or rebellion. Environmental challenges persist. Storms arrive with little warning, tossing the fleet into violent upheaval. The hull creaks and groans, sails threaten to tear, and waves sweep across the decks with relentless force. Even in calmer periods, the constant rocking and shifting demands near continuous attention. Ship's carpenters repair leaks, sailors maintain rigging, and all men pitch in to ensure structural integrity. Every task is performed under the weight of exhaustion, with the knowledge that a single failure could have catastrophic consequences. Despite these extreme conditions, there are brief moments of reprieve. Dolphins follow the fleet, offering small visual amusement. Birds appear sporadically, a subtle promise of land beyond the horizon. Floating vegetation, while a nuisance, occasionally provides a marker of progress. Such moments are precious psychological relief, reinforcing determination and reminding men of the possibility of survival and eventual landfall. Yet these reprieves are fleeting, and the overwhelming presence of the ocean, with its indifferent vastness and hidden dangers, remains. In the midst of relentless labour and mounting psychological strain, the fleet persists, each man's endurance physical, mental and emotional is tested to the limits. Survival depends on a delicate equilibrium rationing scarce resources, performing repetitive yet essential tasks, maintaining discipline, and sustaining hope against an unforgiving environment. The Atlantic demands not just skill and labour, but an extraordinary capacity for resilience in this suspended, endless world. The men of 1492 confront the very boundaries of human capability. Then, after weeks of unbroken horizon, the impossible happens, land appears. At first, it is only a faint, almost imperceptible line on the western edge of the sky, a pale suggestion of solidity amid endless water. Sailors press forward, scanning every ripple and shadow, their exhausted minds struggling to reconcile hope with disbelief. Columbus, observing through a spyglass, records the first signs meticulously, noting the shapes of islands, the patterns of beaches, and the presence of distant vegetation. For the men aboard, this moment transforms fear into a sharp, almost unbearable anticipation. They've crossed an ocean they did not fully understand, surviving storms, scarcity, disease, and their own doubts to glimpse the promise of unknown shores. The islands that appear are unlike anything familiar to European eyes. Beaches of fine, white sand stretch into lush greenery. Palms and hardwoods sway in gentle breezes, their forms mirrored in the calm, azure water. Birds swoop above, signalling abundant life. From a distance, smoke rises in thin spirals from inland villages, hinting at human presence. The landscape is tropical, vivid, and entirely alien. For most crew members, the visual shock is compounded by the physical realization that their ordeal is, at least temporarily, over. Relief mingles with curiosity, trepidation, and the unspoken awareness that new challenges lie ahead. Every observation carries weight. Columbus directs the fleet carefully, noting tides, reefs, and potential anchorages. The ships, battered but still seaworthy, approach cautiously. Navigational hazards abound. Reefs and shoals lie hidden beneath calm water, threatening to ruin vessels already stressed by long weeks at sea. Sailors deploy small boats to sound depths and scout potential landing sites. Each movement is deliberate, balancing caution with urgency. Survival depends on attention to detail even after the seemingly insurmountable crossing is complete. The crew's exhaustion is both physical and emotional. Men stumble on decks, muscles cramped from weeks of labour, feet blistered and swollen, skin tanned and burned, gums bleed from scurvy, and fatigue dulls reflexes. Sleep remains shallow despite relief at sighting land. The mind remains alert for hidden dangers. Yet, amid these trials, the first encounter with terrestrial stability sparks exhilaration. The smell of vegetation, the sound of birds, the feel of a steady, unmoving ground, these sensations revive strength and sharpen focus. The human presence on the islands adds another layer of complexity. Smoke from village fires suggests settlement, agriculture, and society. The presence of inhabitants raises questions of diplomacy, trade, and conflict. Sailors whisper about potential danger, potential reward, and the cultural gulf they are about to bridge. Even now, they do not fully understand the scale, diversity, or history of the people they are approaching. Modern scholars recognize that Columbus has reached the Bahamas, part of a vast archipelago unknown to Europe, yet at the time, identification is impossible, and every assumption carries risk. Columbus interprets these signs through a combination of observation and expectation. Birds and driftwood indicate proximity to further islands. Currents and tides hint at channels and safe passages. He records details in his logs with the dual purpose of navigation and report to the Crown. His notes reflect both empirical observation and interpretation filtered through European frameworks of knowledge and desire. What survives in historical record suggests that hope, fear, and ambition intertwine in every assessment. Landing preparations are meticulous. Small boats ferry men ashore with care, transporting supplies, tools, and livestock. Sailors remain wary, scanning for hidden dangers, reef, wildlife, or human hostility. The approach is cautious because any misstep could undo weeks of survival effort. Once ashore, the first impressions dominate thought soil rich and fertile, trees heavy with fruit, water clear and abundant. Columbus recognizes the strategic importance of fresh water and resources for sustaining both men and ships. He orders the careful collection of food, timber, and other essentials for continued exploration. The psychological impact of landfall is profound. Sailors experience relief, wonder, and cautious optimism. The ocean that dominated and tested them for so long recedes from immediate concern, replaced by an entirely new set of uncertainties: interaction with the inhabitants, navigation through unknown waters, and the continuation of a journey whose ultimate objective remains uncertain. Every man senses the precariousness of survival has shifted from open sea to the unknown world that lies ahead. And yet, beneath relief lies a quiet, unspoken awareness. Crossing the Atlantic was only the first trial. The islands are vibrant, alive, and foreign. Survival will demand not only endurance but adaptability, diplomacy, and a capacity to navigate an entirely new human and ecological landscape. The journey that began in the harbours of Spain, fraught with fear and uncertainty, now confronts the crew with challenges that are unfamiliar but no less perilous. The first encounter with land is both a triumph and the threshold of the next, more complex struggle. The first encounters with the indigenous islanders are tentative, delicate, and layered with misunderstanding. From the ships, sailors observe smoke rising from villages, small canoes skimming the waters, and people moving through lush groves of palms and hardwoods. Columbus orders cautious approaches, sending landing parties with minimal armament, hoping to establish contact without provoking hostility. The men step onto beaches that seem endless, white sand stretching like a stage for human history newly intersecting. The tension is palpable. Centuries of expectation, fear, and hope converge in these first minutes of interaction, where survival and diplomacy are inseparably intertwined. The islanders themselves are wary, yet curious. They watch the strangers from a distance, observing their clothing, the ships, the glint of metal, and the unfamiliar language and gestures. Initial contact is dominated by gestures, mimed offers, and cautious approach. Columbus interprets the reception as potential for friendship, emphasizing gifts and gestures of goodwill. Yet even today, scholars note that the power dynamics are deeply asymmetrical. Europeans arrive armed with steel, unfamiliar animals, and foreign technology, while the islanders assess intentions through intuition, cultural patterns, and practical experience of their environment. No single account fully captures these first moments, and the evidence remains incomplete. Filtered through European logs and interpretation, material curiosity drives early interactions. Sailors offer trinkets, cloth, and beads in exchange for local resources, fruit, fresh water, and food. The islanders reciprocate cautiously, presenting small gifts and demonstrating techniques for fishing, agriculture, and survival in a tropical environment. Communication is improvised, reliant on gestures, tone, and observation. Even small misinterpretations can escalate tension. What is offered as friendship might be read as challenge or intrusion. The fragile equilibrium depends on careful observation and an acute awareness of cultural difference, though neither side fully comprehends the other's worldview. The landscape itself mediates the encounter. Coral reefs, mangroves, and dense vegetation constrain movement, directing paths and gathering points for both parties. Rivers and lagoons provide natural observation posts and sources of food. These environmental factors shape the interaction subtly but decisively. Sailors adapt to terrain with caution, while the islanders leverage familiarity with their land to maintain agency and safety. Survival and negotiation are inseparable. Misreading the environment can jeopardize both. Columbus and his men quickly recognized the potential for misunderstanding. Rituals, greetings, and gestures carry unfamiliar meanings. The Europeans attempt to impose their frameworks of hierarchy, trade, and religious authority onto encounters that follow different logics entirely. Scholars note that these early interactions set a precedent for patterns of miscommunication, adaptation, and, eventually, exploitation that will unfold across subsequent voyages. At the moment, however, curiosity and caution dominate behavior. Both groups seek to gauge intentions without provoking conflict. Observation of the islanders provides unexpected lessons. Europeans note physical adaptation to tropical life, fishing and navigation skills, agricultural knowledge, and social organization. They marvel at craftwork, tools, and methods of storing and transporting food. Simultaneously, the islanders study the strangers' their clothing, metal tools, livestock, and the enormous ships that have appeared from nowhere. Each party learns incrementally, interpreting the other's actions through a lens of survival, necessity, and cautious curiosity. What is not fully grasped, however, is the scale and permanence of the change this encounter will herald in human history. Environmental resources reinforce the stakes. Fresh water, fertile soil, fruit-bearing trees, and abundant fish allow the Europeans to replenish supplies, while also heightening their awareness of the potential for long-term settlement or extended exploration. The land offers a tangible reprieve from the relentless ocean, yet the challenges of adaptation begin immediately. The heat is intense, insects abound, and food must be managed efficiently. Every interaction, every observation, and every choice carries implications for survival and ongoing exploration. Trust remains fragile. Small acts, a gesture of sharing, a gift exchanged, or a misinterpreted movement carry disproportionate weight. Success depends on sensitivity to nuance, attention to immediate consequences, and recognition of human limits under stress. The Europeans must balance ambition, desire for wealth, and curiosity with patience and care, while the islanders weigh risk, opportunity, and cultural integrity. No single explanation fully accounts for how these initial encounters unfold, but the surviving record suggests that careful observation, restraint, and attentiveness are decisive in maintaining peace during the first contact. As men of two worlds converge on this narrow shore, the interplay of curiosity, caution, and survival defines the early moments of engagement. Both sides navigate uncertainty, testing the boundaries of trust, communication, and interpretation. The encounter is at once mundane and momentous. Men replenish water, trade goods, and share basic gestures. Yet these first interactions carry the weight of a transformative history that neither party fully anticipates. The Atlantic voyage is over, but a far more complex and enduring challenge, the navigation of human and cultural difference, has only just begun. With landfall established and initial contact cautiously managed, the focus quickly shifts to gold, resources, and the relentless pressure of ambition. Columbus and his crew, despite exhaustion, are acutely aware that their return to Spain depends not only on survival, but on tangible proof of success. Every observation, every gift, every transaction with the islanders is scrutinized for evidence of wealth that can justify the expedition. Reports of gold, pearls, and other riches dominate thought and conversation aboard the ships. The men are operating under multiple pressures: physical survival, the psychological strain of isolation, and the unyielding demand to produce rewards worthy of royalty. Columbus himself emphasizes potential economic gains in every interaction. He interprets the environment in terms of resources: fertile land, dense forests, navigable waterways, and the proximity of islands as opportunities for exploitation and trade. Even casual observations are filtered through the lens of commerce and discovery. Modern historians note that this practical focus shapes decision-making, influencing which islands are approached, how encounters are managed, and how the crew organizes labor and exploration. In essence, survival begins to intertwine with the imperative for tangible reward, intensifying both opportunity and risk. The presence of gold, or even the perception of it, becomes a catalyst for action and tension. Sailors search beaches, rivers, and streams, often under harsh sun and in challenging terrain, hoping to find shiny flakes or nuggets. Tools are fashioned or improvised to dig, pan, or collect, while every scrap of potential wealth is eagerly documented and preserved. The psychological effect is profound. Treasure offers not only material gain, but also a symbolic confirmation of the expedition's purpose, bolstering morale amid the fatigue and uncertainty of weeks at sea. Pressure from the crown compounds these demands. Columbus knows that reports to Isabella and Ferdinand will be evaluated for both accuracy and impressiveness. Success must be evident in concrete terms, a demonstration of Spain's advantage over Portugal and other European powers. Every decision where to land, what to collect, which interactions to prioritize is influenced by these competing pressures. Leadership requires constant negotiation between immediate survival, long-term strategic goals, and the expectations of distant authority. Scholars still debate the extent to which this dual pressure influenced interactions with indigenous peoples, but the evidence points to its pervasive impact on behavior. Resource management becomes critical. Freshwater, food, and shelter must be balanced against the desire to explore, trade, and extract wealth. Crews rotate through arduous labor, maintaining ships and preparing supplies while simultaneously searching for valuable goods. Islands are mapped, potential anchorage points identified, and navigational hazards recorded. This intense workload strains already exhausted men, but it also reinforces cohesion, providing purpose and direction amidst the uncertainty of exploration. Even minor discoveries: a glittering stone, a fertile grove, or a small river carry disproportionate significance. Interpersonal dynamics are strained under this pressure. Competition over discovery, frustration with difficult labor, and disagreements about priorities create tension among crew members. The Pinzon brothers, as experienced navigators, help mediate disputes and maintain morale, but their authority is limited by exhaustion and the constant influence of ambition. Every interaction, both among Europeans and with islanders, must be carefully managed. Misinterpretation of intent can provoke conflict, jeopardizing survival or souring critical relationships. Discipline and careful observation remain essential. The surrounding environment reinforces both challenge and opportunity. Tropical heat, dense vegetation, and unfamiliar wildlife test physical endurance, while abundant resources provide potential relief and reward. Streams, fruit-bearing trees, and sheltered bays offer essential provisions, yet navigating these spaces is treacherous. Mosquitoes, insects, and unknown diseases threaten health, while reefs and hidden shallows demand continuous vigilance. The interplay of danger and opportunity defines every moment of exploration, shaping human behavior in profound ways. As gold and other resources dominate thought, the expedition also begins to extend its geographic and cultural footprint. Reconnaissance of neighbouring islands and inland areas starts cautiously, balancing curiosity with caution. Every step is measured against potential risk, resource gain, and the capacity of the crew to endure additional exertion. The Atlantic voyage may be behind them, but the challenge of thriving in this new, unfamiliar environment is only beginning. Survival now depends not just on navigation or endurance at sea, but on the capacity to adapt to entirely new landscapes, climates, and social dynamics. What emerges from these early excursions is a delicate balance between ambition and survival. The men pursue wealth while managing exhaustion, disease, and the unpredictability of both human and environmental forces. Each decision carries consequences, shaping both immediate outcomes and the long-term trajectory of the expedition. The interplay of hope, fear, discipline, and desire defines the expedition's progress, setting the stage for events that will test human endurance and ingenuity to their limits. Disaster strikes when the flagship, the Santa Maria, runs aground along the coast of Hispaniola. The massive vessel, already weakened by weeks of ocean stress, strikes a hidden reef in shallow waters, tearing a hole in the hull. Panic spreads among the crew as water rushes in and the ship begins to list. Sailors scramble desperately to save supplies, livestock, and, most importantly, each other. The noise of splintering timber, crashing waves, and shouted orders fills the air. The realization hits immediately the flagship. The vessel that symbolized the expedition's authority and stability is lost. The response is a mixture of ingenuity and desperation. Columbus orders the construction of a makeshift fort from the ship's timbers and salvaged materials. Men work tirelessly to reinforce the hull's remains and create shelter along the shore. Food, water, and supplies are redistributed carefully, prioritizing survival over ambition. The Pinzon brothers and other officers take a central role in coordinating labor, maintaining morale, and ensuring that the initial shock of disaster does not lead to mutiny or disarray. What survives in the historical record suggests that discipline, skill, and quick thinking are decisive in preventing immediate catastrophe. The psychological impact of the wreck is profound. For men who have survived storms, scurvy, exhaustion, and the vast Atlantic, losing the flagship represents both symbolic and practical loss. Confidence in leadership is tested as never before. Crew members confront the fragility of human effort against natural forces. Yet within this crisis lies an unexpected opportunity, the establishment of a permanent foothold on the island. Columbus and his officers recognize that salvaging timber, tools, and supplies from the Santa Maria allows for the creation of shelter, fortifications, and a base for further exploration. The disaster becomes a catalyst for adaptation and ingenuity. Living conditions on shore are challenging, Makeshift structures provide only minimal protection from sun, rain, and insects. Food must be scavenged, fished, or obtained through cautious trade with islanders. Freshwater sources are monitored closely to prevent depletion. Scorched gums, fatigue, and minor injuries continue to weaken men already compromised by previous deprivation. Survival depends not only on labor, but on careful organization, rationing, and cooperation. Every individual's contribution becomes critical to maintaining the collective effort. The presence of local populations adds complexity. Initial encounters continue cautiously, with gift exchange, observation, and gestures intended to maintain peace. The loss of the flagship changes the dynamic. The Europeans are now more dependent on local resources and knowledge. Trust and diplomacy are necessary to avoid conflict and ensure access to food, water, and materials for construction. Miscommunication could prove fatal, yet mutual curiosity encourages careful, measured interactions. These first months on land lay the groundwork for enduring consequences, both social and environmental, that historians continue to analyze. Columbus also faces strategic decisions. Should the fleet remain longer to consolidate a foothold, or should exploration continue immediately to identify more resources and secure the expedition's objectives? Every option carries risk. Storms could strike, supplies could dwindle, or hostility could arise. At the same time, establishing a fortified presence allows for a level of security previously unavailable at sea. The crew must navigate this uncertain balance, reconciling immediate survival with long-term objectives dictated by ambition and the Crown's expectations. Human ingenuity becomes the defining factor. Makeshift fortifications are reinforced with salvaged timber from the Santa Maria. Tools are fashioned or repaired, livestock is tended and food preserved. Sailors adapt to tropical conditions, managing heat, insects, and unfamiliar terrain while maintaining vigilance. The constant labor, though exhausting, restores a sense of purpose and agency. Survival now depends on the ability to create stability from chaos, turning loss into a platform for endurance and continued exploration. The wreck of the Santa Maria thus transforms the expedition's trajectory. What begins as a devastating setback becomes both a test and an opportunity. A small colony of survivors learns to live at a foreign land, dependent on resourcefulness, leadership, and careful observation. The Atlantic crossing is behind them, yet new challenges, cultural, environmental, and logistical, loom large. The disaster underscores the precariousness of human endeavor, the thin margin between survival and catastrophe, and the capacity for resilience and ingenuity in the face of unexpected adversity. With the remains of the Santa Maria providing timber and shelter, Columbus establishes Fort Navidad, a small settlement intended as a foothold for continued exploration and a base for returning resources to Spain. The fort is rudimentary wooden walls reinforced with salvaged beams, simple huts for sleeping, storage for food and water, and areas designated for livestock. Men rotate duties, tending fires, repairing structures, and maintaining vigilance against both environmental hazards and potential threats from nearby indigenous communities. Every plank and nail salvaged from the wreck is invaluable, a lifeline for survival in an unfamiliar land. Life in Fort Navidad is precarious. Food must be sourced from the local environment, through fishing, foraging, and cautious exchanges with the islanders. Water is abundant, but hygiene remains a challenge, particularly as the tropical heat promotes the rapid growth of mold and bacteria. Insects proliferate, making sleep fitful and adding to the crew's already heavy burden. Disease continues to claim subtle victims, Even minor illnesses weaken men already exhausted by weeks at sea and continuous labour. Survival depends on cooperation, careful rationing, and constant attention to environmental hazards. Tensions emerge within the settlement. Social hierarchies, previously maintained aboard the ships, must be reinforced and adapted to the land-based environment. Disputes over labour, food distribution, and authority occasionally flare. The Pinzon brothers and other officers are essential mediators, preserving order and discipline. Yet the isolation and the intensity of survival tasks test loyalty, patience, and interpersonal trust. Scholars note that the dynamics within these early settlements often mirror those at sea, fragile, contingent, and dependent on both leadership and human adaptability. Interactions with indigenous peoples continue, marked by cautious observation and mutual curiosity. Islanders visit the settlement sporadically, observing European behaviour, technology, and methods of shelter construction. Exchanges of gifts, knowledge, and food occur, though the power balance is delicate. The Europeans' dependence on local resources creates opportunities for collaboration, but also for misunderstanding. Cultural differences, rituals, language, social norms create friction, and minor missteps can escalate tensions. The evidence from Columbus's logs indicates that both curiosity and fear shape these early encounters, with survival hinging on attentiveness to subtle cues. Environmental adaptation is ongoing. The fort's location must balance access to fresh water, shelter from storms, and defensibility. Crops are tested for suitability. Local plants and fruits are incorporated into diets. Livestock from the ships is tended carefully, both as food and as a means of sustaining European agricultural practices. Insects, heat, and unfamiliar terrain challenge men's endurance and skill, demanding ingenuity in construction, sanitation, and resource management. Every day brings new lessons in adaptation, reinforcing the fragile equilibrium between humans and environment. Psychological strain remains high. Despite relief at reaching land, the men confront the isolation and uncertainty of their situation. The fort provides shelter, but not safety from the unknown tropical storms. Disease and potential conflicts with local communities loom constantly. Sleep is still broken, labour is relentless, and fear of the unknown persists. The presence of the fort mitigates the immediate threat of the ocean, yet the environment tests resilience in new ways. Men must remain vigilant, adaptive, and cooperative to survive. The establishment of Fort Navidad highlights both opportunity and vulnerability, while it allows for resource consolidation and serves as a base for further exploration. The settlement is fragile, dependent on the continued labour and cooperation of a small, exhausted crew. Historical evidence suggests that early success hinges on improvisation, adaptability, and careful management of social and environmental pressures. Any lapse, whether in discipline, resource allocation, or interaction with local populations, could threaten survival. What begins as a symbol of European ambition is simultaneously a site of acute fragility, embodying both the promise and peril of life in an unfamiliar world. As the crew settles into this new rhythm, the Atlantic voyage recedes into memory, replaced by the immediate challenges of survival, diplomacy, and adaptation. Fort Navidad becomes both sanctuary and crucible, a place where the skills, endurance, and resilience honed at sea are tested anew on land. The fragile settlement represents a bridge between two worlds, a threshold where survival, human ingenuity, and cultural encounter intersect with profound and lasting consequences. The men of 1492 are no longer merely voyagers. They are settlers and witnesses in a landscape that will shape the course of history. After weeks spent establishing Fort Navidad and interacting with the local population, Columbus prepares the fleet for the return crossing to Spain, fully aware that the Atlantic eastbound is far more dangerous than the westward journey. The ships are repaired and provisioned as best possible with salvage materials, local resources, and rations accumulated over months. Even minor miscalculations could result in disaster storms, unfamiliar currents, or insufficient supplies could easily turn the return voyage into a fatal trial. The psychological tension among the crew is palpable. After months of exertion and deprivation, exhaustion amplifies fear and suspicion. Every decision now carries weight not only for survival, but also for reputation, legacy, and the expectations of the Spanish crown. Navigation becomes especially critical. Returning against the trade winds requires careful planning. Columbus relies on a combination of dead reckoning, celestial observation, and accumulated knowledge from the initial crossing. He monitors currents, wind patterns, and seasonal weather, attempting to anticipate shifts that could delay or endanger the voyage. Even with experience and meticulous observation, the journey remains perilous. Historians still debate how much Columbus understood about the Atlantic's complex wind systems, but surviving accounts indicate that precise calculations and careful attention were essential for successful passage. Misjudgment at this stage could imperil the entire expedition and undo months of survival effort. The crew faces renewed physical and mental strain. Sailors are already weakened from scurvy, exhaustion, and tropical disease. Hours of strenuous labour hoisting sails, pumping bilge, scrubbing decks, and tending to ships continue under harsh sun, salt spray, and relentless motion. Sleep remains broken, food is rationed strictly, and water is carefully conserved. The mental fatigue of months of uncertainty manifests in irritability, anxiety, and occasional hallucinations, fear of storms. Hidden shoals and open sea isolation looms large. Even the most experienced sailors are vulnerable to errors, misjudgments, and accidents that could prove fatal. Storms, when they strike, arrive with sudden intensity. The Atlantic eastbound proves no gentler than on the way west. Waves crash against hulls, masts groan, and decks are swept by violent swells. Men fight to secure sails, anchor lines, and supplies while simultaneously contending with fatigue and weakened physical condition. Shipboard injuries, minor illness, and exhaustion amplify the dangers. Every sailor's skill, alertness, and endurance are tested to the extreme, highlighting the fragile boundary between survival and catastrophe. The ocean remains indifferent to human plans, ambition, or history. Interactions with the natural world continue to demand vigilance. Birds, drifting vegetation, and changes in watercolor offer clues to proximity to islands, shoals, or currents. Columbus studies these signs meticulously, seeking every advantage for navigation and safety. Even small misinterpretations can be costly, underscoring the delicate interplay between observation, experience, and luck in survival. Evidence from ship logs suggests that constant attention to these environmental indicators is as critical to completing the voyage as any prior planning or leadership strategy. Social dynamics aboard the ships remain complex and fraught. Crew morale fluctuates between hope, fatigue, and frustration. Arguments over rations, tasks, and responsibilities arise despite disciplined rotation and leadership oversight. The Pinson brothers and other officers mediate disputes, enforce order, and sustain cohesion. Yet the persistent fatigue and isolation magnify tensions. Trust in Columbus's leadership is tested, requiring constant demonstration of competence and decisiveness. What survives in historical record suggests that psychological endurance, cohesion, and careful management of human behavior are as vital as the physical integrity of the vessels themselves. Despite these challenges, progress is made. Days of strenuous sailing, careful observation, and measured decision-making gradually move the fleet closer to Europe. Land becomes visible, first as a distant horizon and eventually as familiar coastal contours. Relief mingles with fatigue, reinforcing the crew's awareness of their vulnerability and the exceptional nature of their achievement. Even as they near home, lessons from the journey: adaptation, resilience, leadership, and the limits of human endurance remain vividly present, shaping the behavior and perceptions of every sailor aboard. The return crossing ultimately transforms understanding of the Atlantic. The voyage confirms the feasibility of transoceanic navigation, demonstrates the limits and possibilities of human endurance, and provides critical knowledge about currents, winds, and maritime survival. For the crew, it is the culmination of months of extraordinary physical, psychological, and social trial. For Columbus, it represents both personal triumph and the opening of a new chapter in European engagement with the wider world. Yet, beneath celebration, there is the quiet recognition that survival depended as much on careful observation, discipline, and adaptation as on courage or ambition. The Atlantic has measured human capability in its most extreme form, and the results are indelibly recorded in the lives of those who endured it. The crossing of 1492, once complete, reverberates far beyond the immediate survival of Columbus and his crew. Spain receives news of the expedition's success with a mixture of awe, political calculation, and the anticipation of wealth. The return of men, reports, and tangible goods, gold flakes, exotic plants, and accounts of new lands marks the beginning of an era in which European imagination and ambition expand dramatically. What was initially a perilous voyage for survival transforms into a story of strategic opportunity, laying the foundations for exploration, colonization, and profound cultural contact. The Atlantic has not only tested human endurance, but reshaped historical trajectories in ways no single participant could have fully comprehended. The immediate consequences are striking. The Spanish crown consolidates power and prestige through these discoveries, using the narrative of success to assert dominance over rival powers, particularly Portugal. Merchants and financiers interpret the expedition as the opening of new trade routes, potential markets, and sources of wealth. Explorers, sailors, and scholars begin to recalibrate their understanding of the Atlantic and its possibilities. Even knowledge of geography, previously speculative and incomplete, begins to expand. Though European maps still underestimate the size and complexity of the lands encountered, the voyage becomes both practical and symbolic, a demonstration of human ingenuity confronting natural and unknown challenges. For the crew, the experience transforms personal understanding of risk, endurance, and survival. Months of hunger, scurvy, exhaustion, storms, mutiny threats, and extreme isolation leave an indelible mark. Their survival depends on discipline, skill, cooperation, and the careful mediation of psychological tension. Each man carries stories of endurance, observation, and adaptation that shape European accounts of the journey. Historical records suggest that these experiences influenced future navigation, maritime practice, and even social structures within subsequent expeditions. lessons learned in the Atlantic's expanse about leadership, human limits, and environmental unpredictability become critical for the voyages that follow. The voyage also initiates a profound intersection of worlds. European presence on Caribbean islands introduces new materials, technologies, and practices, while simultaneously exposing Europeans to previously unknown ecosystems, climates, and societies. Initial encounters with indigenous peoples set patterns of exchange, observation, and miscommunication that resonate throughout subsequent interactions. Early assessments of resources, geography, and social structures provide a framework for the rapid expansion that follows, though the full consequences, cultural disruption, disease, and conflict remain far in the future. At the moment, survival and observation are paramount, yet the seeds of transformative history are unmistakable. Cultural and environmental observations accumulate alongside practical lessons. Europeans note agricultural practices, fishing techniques, and social organization, while simultaneously interpreting landscapes in terms of utility and potential wealth. Island ecosystems, previously unknown, are catalogued and assessed. Birds, plants, and land formations are recorded meticulously, feeding both immediate survival needs and future exploratory ambition. The knowledge gathered is partial, sometimes flawed, yet invaluable, providing the foundation for increasingly ambitious voyages into the Atlantic and beyond. Ultimately, the 1492 voyage exemplifies the intersection of human resilience and environmental challenge. Survival required mastery of the ships, careful rationing, adaptation to tropical climates, attention to social dynamics, and psychological endurance across weeks of extreme uncertainty. Leadership, experience, and ingenuity determined not just immediate survival, but the capacity to extract knowledge and resources essential for continued exploration. No single explanation accounts fully for the fleet's endurance. Success rests on a complex combination of skill, observation, cooperation, and endurance in the face of overwhelming environmental and human challenges. The legacy of survival is inseparable from transformation. The Atlantic voyage shapes personal, cultural, and historical narratives, influencing subsequent exploration, colonization, and global interaction. The crossing demonstrates the fragility of human endeavor against natural forces while revealing the extraordinary capacity for adaptation and resilience. The expedition survives both by skill and chance, leaving an indelible imprint on human history. From the cramped decks of the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria to the tropical shores of Hispaniola, the men of 1492 endure, adapt, and observe, their journey forever entwined with the shaping of a world newly opened to human ambition, curiosity, and consequence. The journey of 1492, when viewed in its totality, is more than a story of ships, storms, and distant lands. It is a meditation on human resilience, the thin margin between survival and catastrophe, and the fragile balance of courage, ingenuity, and luck. For months, men endured conditions that would have broken lesser crews' endless ocean: scarcity of food and water, disease, psychological strain, and the constant threat of disaster. Yet, through a combination of leadership, adaptation, cooperation, and perseverance, they persisted. The Atlantic, vast and indifferent, measured human capacity in its rawest form, testing both body and mind, leaving an imprint on those who crossed it that would never fade. As the fleet returned to Spain, the immediate triumph of landfall and survival coexisted with the enduring fragility of human endeavour. Each man carried not just stories of gold, exploration, and encounter, but the deep awareness of mortality and the constant presence of uncertainty. The voyage demonstrates that survival is rarely the product of courage alone. It is the outcome of careful observation, skillful management of resources, and the ability to endure monotony, fear, and discomfort. These lessons resonate far beyond 1492, applicable to any human endeavour in which the unknown stretches beyond the horizon, literal or metaphorical. The broader consequences unfold across centuries. The crossing opens previously unimaginable connections between continents, peoples, and ecosystems. It initiates patterns of cultural exchange, conflict, and adaptation that transform both Europe and the Caribbean, setting the stage for centuries of exploration, trade, and transformation. Yet it also serves as a reminder of fragility. One miscalculation, one storm, one misjudged interaction could have erased the expedition entirely, leaving no record, no legacy, and no transformation. Survival is always contingent, and history often hinges on narrow margins. In the quiet moments, after storms have passed and shores are secured, the Atlantic still whispers its lessons. The vastness of the ocean, its unyielding indifference, and the subtle signs it offers demand respect, vigilance, and humility. Men aboard the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria learn to read wind, wave, and sky, to endure deprivation, and to navigate both physical and psychological peril. Each day survived represents a triumph of human skill and adaptability, a testament to the capacity for endurance under extreme conditions. Yet it's equally a reminder of the precariousness of life in unfamiliar, unforgiving environments. History, when measured in these terms, is not merely the record of events, but the story of human persistence in the face of uncertainty. Columbus's voyage exemplifies this truth. It is a story of ambition intertwined with survival, of discovery inseparable from risk, of resilience exercised in its rawest form. The men who crossed the Atlantic did more than open new routes or claim islands. They demonstrated the enduring human capacity to confront the unknown, to adapt, and to endure. Their survival is a lens through which the precariousness, courage, and ingenuity of human life can be understood across time and space. And so, as the ships fade into history, the Atlantic continues, vast and unyielding, indifferent to those who dare its expanse. It is a reminder that survival is never guaranteed, that every journey into the unknown tests body, mind, and will. Yet within that challenge lies the possibility of transformation, personal, cultural, and historical. The crossing of 1492 endures as a story of fragile human resilience, a moment when endurance, observation, and determination reshaped not only the fates of those who voyaged, but the trajectory of the world itself. In that tension between vulnerability and possibility, between fear and discovery, the essence of exploration and of survival remains vividly clear.